So in each thing in our Notion database, we've added a summary of our perspective. But I noticed that Ian has added 2 fields called Ian's perspective and only 1 field called Ash's perspective. Thus,
because I'm always in 2 minds about everything.
So it's nothing to do with the inherent unfairness of the What a Lot of Things podcast.
No, there's no unfairness because we've defined fairness really clearly. And as long as we continue to take it in turns to go first, then we know that we have a perfectly fair podcast with no unfairness at all in any way, ever, anywhere.
So you're not saying that your perspective has twice the weight of my perspective?
Well, only if I write the same perspective in there twice, in which case you better bloody listen to it. Oh, so I'm going to say that since my beating last time was definitely the second thing, I'm going to have the third. No, wait.
Sorry, the beating was a little bit heavy, wasn't it? You've forgotten the way that it all works.
I'm still a bit dazed and confused as a consequence.
I'll remember that. Yeah.
So I'm going to go first.
Okay.
So I have a thing.
Tell us of your thing.
So my thing is personal productivity. I'd like to say that was my thing in life, but feel like it isn't always. So I thought about this because I find this to be a continual battle. And I don't know about you, but you see lots of people who sail through life in a kind of, look at me, how productive I am. I wake up at 5 a.m. and then every second is accounted for until I go to bed at 10 to 5.
I take an ice bath.
The next morning. Yes.
I bench press 300 pounds.
Yes.
I eat some kind of seaweed breakfast or whatever it is.
Yeah. Those people. So if you're one of those people,
then look away now.
Yeah. We do include chapter markers in this podcast, so you can skip to the next thing if you don't want to hear yourself being pilloried. Yeah, so kudos to those people, but I am not those people.
Okay.
And I suppose the thing that gets me is that there are some really interesting systems that people have come up with to help you be more personally productive.
Okay.
And I guess we should think about what does that mean.
Sure.
But I think it means, I think there are some qualities of personal productiveness. I think one of them is, this is the sort of stuff I should have written in the in the notes about this thing. So the first one is that you get things done that you intend to do. And another one is that you don't agree to do things for which you have no capacity.
Okay. Yeah.
And it'd be nice if there was a third one I could think of. But
so maybe if you worked on things that were of value, because that's kind of my perspective on personal productivity a lot of the time. Because it's all very well being productive. But
well, yeah, productive in the sense of getting things done.
Yeah.
But actually, you want to get valuable things done.
Yeah, the things that matter, or the hard things, or whatever it is.
So the 3 things, it's turning into a bit of a Monty Python sketch now, isn't it? So that you get things done that you intend to do, that you don't agree to do things that you have no capacity for, and that the things you do have value.
Yeah.
So if we say that's the what a lot of things definition of personal productivity.
Yeah, I think until we talk about it more, I'm completely on board with that.
And then we wind forward 10 episodes and release our own special stationery system and accompanying products to help you too can be as productive as we are. Although I wouldn't say that was currently an aspiration that anyone should have about me anyway. But yeah, so if you adopt that kind of definition, then there's some, very interesting systems and methods that people have come up with.
Yep.
And I think the most impactful one in this millennium.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's actually, it's not been that long, is it?
Is David Allen's book, Getting Things Done.
Yeah. Which
actually is charmingly pre-digital in many ways. So in the book, if you read it, it talks about having folders for different days of the month and putting, and then folders for months of the year and then putting bits of paper in them that say when you're going to do things. But basically, this methodology that came up with for getting things done hinges on the idea that you have a system and that it is a trusted system.
Yeah.
What that means is every time you agree to do a new thing, it goes in the system.
Okay.
And my attempts at getting things done by his system always break down. And they break down when I'm really busy and have far too much to do.
Yeah.
And then I think to myself, oh, well, I haven't got time to maintain this system at the moment. And then as the first thing that you agree to do, where you didn't put it in the system and you know it completely undermines the whole thing because it's no longer a trusted system. And you can no longer rely on it to have your entire spectrum of everything you've got to do in it.
Yeah.
In which case, then you've got a big load of things you're meant to do and some other things, and you're lost.
Yeah.
So I suppose another, maybe point 4 should be personal productivity has to continue to work in extraordinary circumstances and too much to do.
So you tried other people's systems?
Yes. And so I've got this really rather wonderful piece of software called OmniFocus.
Right.
Which is only available to those of us who are on Apple platforms. It comes from the Omni Group, who've made some very good software, but only for Apple platforms.
All right. Omni Consumer Products.
Omni OCP. That's what those initials already stand for outside context problem.
Oh, right. Okay.
Which is coined by Ian M. Banks in his Culture series. For when something happens for which there is no point of reference, which I suppose undermines their productivity.
Because one of the things that I find really interesting is that people come up with personal productivity systems, and then I think that other people try and adopt them and they don't work because they're built for that person. It's like the Spotify model, right? It's like, maybe it worked for Spotify, but it won't work for anyone else because you're not Spotify.
Well, yeah, but you see, are we all special and unique snowflakes?
That's not quite what I'm saying. You're going to press a button.
Is it what you mean, though? I know it wasn't what you said, but it's kind of suggesting that actually everyone has to have their own unique solution. But actually it seems like a problem with a lot of commonalities between people.
Sure. So to speak from my own personal productivity experience, so I have a system. I haven't packaged it for sale to the world
yet
because it's just a cobbled together system of things that I've collected over the years. So I have a Trello board, which has all of my life's tasks in it.
Including this podcast.
Including this podcast. There is actually a single task with multiple checklists called What a Lot of Things. Because if something repeats over and over again, I don't see the value in I manage it by checklist rather than by task.
Ooh.
And that works for me. I like that because it means that I'm not just creating hundreds upon hundreds of different tasks.
So if you go to theashsystem.com, you too can buy a screenshot of Ash's Trello board with all of the task names blurred out.
So I have work in progress limits, which is the really scary part, which I think is the bit that a lot of people, organisations, however you want to phrase it, very rarely adhere to.
Well, it's the most counterintuitive thing in the whole of lean.
Yeah.
And trying to, there's all these elaborate exercises, aren't there, for people to try and...
Pushing pennies around and things.
Yeah, where you're trying to illustrate to people the virtues of only working on a limited number of things. The main one being that you finish them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just even out of boredom.
Yeah. So if I've got something like big going on in life, so say I have a task called running. I run a lot. I run like 8 hours a week, which is a lot, which is like another day's work, basically. That always takes up one of my work in progress slots because it's a lot.
So what is your WIP limit?
4 tasks.
And this is one of them?
Yes. This might move in and out a little bit because it ebbs and flows. So I'll come to that in a...
But consistency.
Yeah. Well, it's ebbing at the moment. No, flowing rather than ebbing, isn't it? So,
yes, it is.
So let's just go with that.
No, I've suddenly realised that now there's this precarious nature of how do we keep it in the list of 4 things?
So
not a lot of things.
So there are things that like become fixed, let's say.
Yeah.
Like running. Or if I'm in a full-time role, that will become one of the fixed things and it takes up a spot in that work in progress. Yeah. And then other things can like sort of flow past it or ebb around it. But I always have like a handle, or try and have a handle on how much work in progress I've got.
I mean, that's incredible, actually. I mean, I would love to do something like that, but I don't think I could. Yeah. It's difficult because you're always saying no to things.
Yeah. So I'm not perfect by any means. I will often stumble over the same things and say yes to something that I shouldn't have done, or start something which isn't in my... I'd be like, ooh, it'd be nice to write a blog about that. And I'd start writing it. And then after a little while, I'd be like, stop doing that. It's not in your... Add it to the board, add it to your list of blog ideas, and then you can prioritise it along with everything else, because there's actually other stuff which might not be quite as exciting. Self-assessment tax returns.
Darn it.
Which are higher priority, and you need to do those first, and then you can have fun writing about testing and things like that. And it does take quite a lot of discipline.
Yeah.
And then I have epics and tasks. So I've taken bits from agile ways of working, taken bits from lean, work in progress limits, classes of service, and made them all into my weird system that helps me to get things done. And I think it's more like I've cobbled it together out of the things that I've learned into something that works for me. And if I wrote a book about it, and other people might try it, but it might not work for them. So
as long as they bought the book first.
Yeah.
Does that really matter to you?
Yeah, that's true, actually. No, it doesn't. And then the layer underneath that is that for each event, say a conference or a task, say writing an article or whatever it is, I then create a folder on Google Drive, which is indexed by date, to store all information pertaining to that event and or task, matching, and then put a link to that in the Trello card. So I know where to go to see all the notes and things that I've taken and all the documents and whatever it is. That is like the layer down of my system.
So what's the smallest thing that can be a Trello card?
So the smallest thing. So I need to book some travel accommodation for something me and Gwen are doing in London. That's a pretty small thing based on my board.
And what's the biggest thing?
So big things I've got in there are running.
Yeah.
Getting a new role, because that was lots and lots of small tasks. But in my system, I decided not to create a separate one for each one, and just had one task with a set of checklists in it to keep track of everything. And then what a lot of things, that's a big one as well. So at the moment, I have running, the new role, what a lot of things, and I'm reading a book by Mark Wintringham on software testing with generative AI. And that's in my doing. So my doing is full at the moment. So I will need to complete tasks on those, complete the checklists on those tasks before I can move something else in.
Do you complete them before they leave, or can you move them back into...
You can move them back.
If something really urgent came along, you could take one of those 4 things that's not what a lot of things and move it back into...
Yeah. So I guess I'd probably make decisions like, say if someone said, you need to fill in this particular form for whatever tax or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'd say, right, well, and it's going to take a while. I'd stick it on the board. I'd probably take something like the book that I'm reading out for now and focus on that.
And you would then not read that book until it was back in again?
Yeah.
Well, that seems like a very measured and sensible system.
Yeah. I mean, it's completely... It's grown over time. I've realised that some things just repeat. So, like the What a Lot of Things podcast, it repeats.
Like a bad meal.
So instead of managing it as individual tasks, it just made sense to manage it differently and take away the admin and just have one template checklist for each.
So what you might do is you might move it back into to-do while you replace it with something else that might last 3 days.
Yeah.
And I might not even notice that you've done that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't there's no estimates on any of these things.
I thought, I can't believe that you have no estimates in your task list, Cash. It's just, it's just such a departure from your normal way of working.
Some things have deadlines. So like, for example...
The tax return.
I'm running a race on Sunday, which, despite my desire for no deadlines in my life at all, the world doesn't quite work that way. Certain events will happen on certain dates, whether you're ready or not.
Yes.
So
that's an interesting one, actually, because David Allen talks about that.
Oh, right, okay.
And he's basically saying most things don't have deadlines. And he particularly rails against people who are, or not people, he rails against the concept of adding a deadline to something just arbitrarily. Oh, I'd like to do that by Friday. But is that really a deadline? And a deadline is when you're committed to something or there's some immovable reason to do it. As you say, the race is on that day.
Yeah.
You're going to have to do it then.
It's either then or not at all.
But he's quite down on, I'm trying to think of the right word, kind of arbitrary deadlines.
Yeah.
People think, I must put deadlines on all my tasks, but actually only on the ones that need it.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I subscribe to that. So rather than just... I know some people think or have the belief that if you impose a short-term deadline on something, it focuses the mind on achieving it. But I like to think if something's important, I'll just go and do it. I think. I'm as vulnerable to procrastination as anybody else. But if it's important, I think I'll just go and do it rather than waiting.
No, that's again, is a very positive kind of approach.
Yeah.
That I think it's an interesting one. I read this book by Oliver Burkeman, which is called something like, might be 4,000 Weeks.
All right.
Or I might have just made that up.
It's not 10,000 hours. That's something else, isn't it? So that's the practice one, isn't it? 10,000 hours.
Yeah. So that's yes, you're right. 10,000 hours is how long you allegedly have to do something for to master it, which I believe has been a bit debunked.
It's like doing 10,000 steps a day, right?
Yeah, that's just it's an arbitrary deadline. I mean, it's just an arbitrary number to give you a target to aim at. That's not, But his book was called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals.
Oh.
And one of the fascinating things in that he says is basically when you do something, everything you decide to do is accompanied by a million things that you decide to not do at that time. And he's basically saying any decision to do something is a decision to not do a load of other stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, you can never do all the things. It's impossible. And if you try, you burn yourself out.
Yeah.
And what you've got to realise is his 4,000 weeks is about 80 years or something. So, that's your time on the planet. And the way to approach it, he says, I hope I'm getting this right. There'll be a detailed apology in the show notes. Actually, I met him because he did a talk at TEDx Manchester.
Right, okay.
Well, after he'd written this book where he kind of talked about it. So I met him briefly because I help out at that. But I think that you can't do everything. Nobody can. And you can spend your life feeling terrible at all the things you're not managing to do.
Yeah.
But I think he's basically saying what you've got to do is be able to fail gracefully at all the things you don't manage to do. So rather than promising to do everything and then letting everybody down, you just admit to yourself, I'm not going to be able to do everything. And and then go from there.
Yeah.
I thought that felt to me a bit more of a healthy perspective than the collect everything together and then do it all.
Yeah.
Which is how I came away from GTD with.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think you do need to have a healthy dose of realism and forgive yourself your imperfections. So one thing I've noticed with my system is that if it doesn't make it onto the board, it doesn't get done. Which
seems obvious.
Yeah, it
but
does.
Probably not at the time of decision.
No, absolutely. So, and then I guess that's probably when it starts to lose its integrity a little bit, because there's probably something that's come in that I haven't put on the board, and therefore I struggle to work on it because it's not on the board. And then I need to stop myself and say, right, where does this fit? And so it's like having that discipline to do that. But there are sometimes like periods of like uncertainty where I'm like, ooh, well, there's all these things coming from left, right and centre. What am I going to do?
So this is a bit tangential, but you know that Windows recall thing that was knocking around? So Microsoft, for their Copilot PCs, which are basically laptops with special extra AI processing power in them.
Right, okay.
There was this thing called recall where basically Microsoft spy on everything you type, say, do
Sounds
in
wonderful.
your computer, store it in a database on your PC, and then you can always go back and say, remind me about X, and it will know because it's recorded everything going on your computer. And lots of people have been very excited about that in a kind of, you what? kind of way. And some people, and I think Microsoft have responded by encrypting the database on your local machine.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. If you had something that looked at everything you did on your computer, and maybe if it was an agent on your phone as well, it could follow you around and listen to what you were talking about and do all the... You could theoretically, even today, have an AI. This is our productivity app, by the way. An AI that when it sees you doing something that's not on your list...
Tells you you're bad.
Plays a siren. So it's like...
Lock.
And you're like, oh, I now notice that I was going to bed and I hadn't written sleeping on my list. Just let me rearrange the Trello accordingly. But, I mean, that's a bit frivolous. But you could imagine once AIs are able to look at all the stuff we're doing, that you could actually have an app that could help you stay on track with that, or at least make it more mindful.
Yeah, I think, make it more mindful is probably the... prompt you to
control all of your activities forever. Sorry.
That's all right.
I should have pressed a button on my machine to have said all of those things. Hang on, I've got this.
Squeaky voice.
I will control all of your activities forever.
That's better.
But yeah, making it more mindful and reminding you when you're doing... I mean, I also go back to Due, which is that app we talked about last time, where it nags you.
Yeah.
And also discovered that was not for the Android and Windows people among us.
Yeah. So the other thing that happens in my system as well, if something is truly large but one-off, for example, if I'm writing a training course or a tutorial for a conference, I'll put a placeholder on my Life Trello board. It is actually called Life. And with a link to another Trello board with the thing that is really large.
Oh.
So like the testability book, various training courses and tutorials, because I think that having them on this board would crowd it too much.
Yeah.
So there's a placeholder with a link to another Trello board, which is temporary. And once I've done all the tasks and built whatever it is that I need to build, then that board would go away.
But that's interesting because that again is about sizing, isn't it? It's keeping your life board at some way that you can visually...
Yeah, because especially something like a training course or a tutorial, for example, because it's big and it has a deadline. So the conference is on this date.
Yeah.
So it's a large piece
got to be ready.
yeah, exactly. So it's a large piece of work and it has a deadline. So it comes back to those detecting what type of work that you're doing and responding accordingly. And that's what I do with things that are real big. Rather than trying to put them on this board, I will say this is going to take up part of my work in progress. But the individual tasks will be somewhere else.
So what you're saying is that basically, if I do this thing you're doing, I'll be fine.
You might be. I guess that's...
It's not impossible.
No. But you might think about work differently to me and think about, productivity differently to me.
I might be worse at saying no than you.
Yeah, maybe. Because it is hard, isn't it? It's one of the more difficult things that one has to do.
Yeah.
And especially when, say, if the work is, someone says, can you come and speak at this conference? We'd really love to have you there. I'm like, oh, amazing.
They really love to have me.
Ooh, this is incredible. I feel great.
Oh, the dopamine.
But then also there's a whole other set of things happening around that.
Yeah.
Then, because a few years ago I did have to drop out of a conference because I had just had too much conference-y sort of activity on. This was a few years ago now. And it was hard to tell the organisers that I couldn't come and do it. Whereas now I'm much more comfortable because I have the system. I can look at it and say, hey, well, actually, you've got a bunch of things happening in that month. So it's probably best that you say no graciously.
Yeah.
So, yeah. My productivity system, and I think this is similar for everybody, it's just a set of things that you've learnt over the years about how to manage your life.
Or not.
Or not. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's the thing. It's like having a system is good, but then there's a whole bunch of experience which goes into managing it.
Yeah, and you have to be able to trust it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the trusted point is a good one because I trust my system.
And that's because I think it's easier to trust a system where you can see all of it in one go.
Yeah.
And that simplicity. Because the GTD system, especially in terms of OmniFocus, which has embodied it, there's a concept of a context.
Right.
So what you're really trying to do is look at only things that you can actually do now. For example, if I'm at work, I can't do something at home if I'm at work,
sure.
So I don't want to see those tasks. And contexts can become arbitrarily complex because there's also things like, do I want to do this really complicated and demanding thing in the early afternoon? No. And there's a great book called, I think, When, by Daniel Pink, which talks about time. It's all about time.
Right.
But one of the things it talks about is how everyone works in these cycles during the day. And, there are people who are early birds or larks, as they call them, and there are other people who are night owls. Mm-hmm. So it's not universal for everybody, most people falling somewhere on a scale. But for most people, the early afternoon time is a very dangerous time to do something important.
Yeah.
And there was a study done, he cites, in a hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, I think, where basically if your operation was early in the afternoon, it was basically shockingly worse outcomes for patients. Absolutely shockingly.
Yeah.
And they did a whole load of stuff to improve it. So they made checklists, verbal checklists, where they have to verbally acknowledge to each other what they're doing and all this kind of stuff in the OR, in the operating room, because of how bad it is to do high quality work at the wrong time of day for you as a person. Interestingly, it was kind of in the morning, the word he uses is vigilant.
Right.
So you're able to do things requiring a great amount of focus and attention to detail. And then in the early afternoon, it's just rubbish and you should just do unimportant admin.
Yeah.
But then later on in the afternoon, you come back again, but you're much less vigilant. So you can do things involving creativity because your ideas traffic cop, if you like, that would tell you, no, don't do that. It's people will laugh at you kind of thing. That is much more relaxed. So you can be more creative later on in the day like that. It was a great book, actually. I recommend it.
Yeah.
So again, what time of day? So you can, in your GTD contexts, you can even have a kind of energy level context.
Okay, yeah.
So you say, I've got low energy levels. I only want to see tasks that I can do with a low energy level.
Yeah.
But what happens is, as you implement all these different ideas, your system becomes arbitrarily complex and harder to maintain. Because every time you add a task to it, now you're thinking about where could I do that task? How much energy do I need to do it?
Yeah.
It also has the idea of an inbox, by the way. So you collect tasks into your system with a very low friction way. So with OmniFocus, I can press, I think, Control Space and type a task in and hit Enter, and it's in the inbox.
Yeah.
And then you spend time organising. So you look at your inbox and you say, okay, where do these tasks belong? And if you're clever, then you're like, does this task belong? Or should I be deleting it? All these kinds of things. So there's a lot to like about that system, and I'm quite good at it quite a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I joke about it, but actually I do, I get a lot of things done.
Yeah.
But am I good enough at saying no? Probably not. Am I able to keep track of it at times of high strain? And the answer is that's my Achilles heel.
Yeah.
When I've agreed to do too much and I've got so much stuff to do and I'm trying to overcome my my desire to procrastinate because it's too stressful to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
My mental health goes up and down like most people's, I think, and sometimes can cope with climbing a huge mountain, and sometimes I have to go and hide it behind a bush at the bottom and hope no one sees that I'm even in the vicinity of that mountain.
Yeah.
I do get things done.
Yeah.
My Achilles heel is, oh my goodness, I can't possibly get all these things done. I'm just going to start doing things and not use my system.
Yeah.
And it becomes untrusted then.
Yeah.
And that may be just because it's overcomplicated.
Maybe. Well, I think it's okay to be, with your personal productivity, one must be gentle with oneself and try and remember that. It's even the people who say that they get up at 3 a.m. and, have done 6 hours work before anyone else has gone out of bed. I would imagine they have their off days as well. And if they say that they don't, then...
I just think they must be perfect in every way.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I think...
We can't all be Tim Cook.
No.
Or Tim Apple, as Donald Trump likes to
Tim
call him.
Apple. It's an easier way to remember who he is. He probably knows loads of Tim Cooks.
Yeah, that must be it. Donald Trump and his vast array of Tim Cooks that he knows. He thought, I'll just call this one Tim Apple.
Who's that text from? Tim Cook? I don't know. I've got 10 of those.
So I'm exhaustedly emerging from the far side of that thing. I don't know if we learned anything, did we? I did. I think I learned about your very sensible sounding system.
Well,
which seems to compare favourably to my slightly more freewheeling one.
No. So, I don't know. I just have my own system, but I recognise that the components of it are learned from lots of different places. And I've created something which works for me. I have never tried to take on someone else's system wholesale. So, I don't know. It might work for me, it might not.
Yeah, well, I suspect when you're a productivity magnate with your system, the book of your system in the New York Times bestseller list, we will all...
Be more of a pamphlet.
It'll be... No. Well, just paste a pamphlet into an AI and ask it to elaborate on it a bit. That would definitely work.
It's like, put some treasure troves in there.
Yes, that
pad it out a bit.
Delve for.
Pad it out a bit for me. There you go.
Yes.
Straight to the top of the bestseller chart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first. Cool. I think it's time for an interlude.
It is.
I'm just going to sag back into my chair and reflect on my to-do list. So you can just sing a song or drink a water. You drink your water.
I do need a drink of water. So one thing I've enjoyed about the hunt for a new job has been the level of bots on LinkedIn who, as soon as you use the hashtag open to work, then they post and say, let's connect. But when you actually look at them, there's like, this is Amy Bradley with a picture of an elderly Chinese man who is a homemaker who works for Nestle. And then
that's a killer combination, really, isn't it?
I was like, if you exist, then the world is not as I understand it, basically.
That's a great phrasing, If you exist, the world is not as I understand it. That should be your email signature or something like that. That just needs to be preserved in some way.
But then someone messaged me who does exist, probably, and said, there's people asking you to connect with them based on your open to work post. So I was like, but they don't exist. But that's not the name of the game, though, is it?
No.
The name of the game is to increase the follower count. So if you connect with people who don't exist, then you get an inflated follower count.
You'd be better off joining Mastodon. I may have said that before, I can't remember.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with Mastodon, so
I'll send you a link, Ad. I'll send you a link.
So that was one of my little
hackydome.io.
One of my small amusements
Yes.
from the recent job search. I enjoyed the bots on LinkedIn and the seemingly unlikely combinations of names, pictures.
I am a %S who %S
Yeah.
at %S.
Yeah, pretty much. So I did enjoy that. And then me misunderstanding those who wish to inflate their follower count utilizing these bots. I didn't follow any of these bots. No. So I'm not interested in inflating my follower count.
There's a joke here about an inflatable follower count. Follower count. Not follow account. I don't know where that came from. Well, I do.
Yeah. But somehow these bots, they've managed to pass all the validations of being on LinkedIn, right?
All the validations.
Whatever they are. It's a long time since I've registered for LinkedIn, to be fair, so I don't know what they are now.
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm not going to be doing it again.
No.
I already have slightly more LinkedIn than I can handle.
Yeah, one of me on there is enough.
Yes. Maybe you should have another one called Northern Tester, who can then post stuff about how he wishes he could be called Ash Winter, but but someone else has that name.
No. Someone else might have Northern Tester by now.
Probably. Yeah. Although, to be fair, with LinkedIn, you can have lots of people with the same name. Otherwise it would be a bit upsetting if you had a common name.
Sorry, the other Ash Winter's already got it. So, are you ready for my question thing, Ian?
Yes. Go nuts.
Go nuts. So, is Conway's law dictating the systems that we build? Is my question. So I hear you ask, what is Conway's law?
What is Conway's law,
Thanks,
Ash?
Ian. So it was coined in the late 1960s.
Was it by somebody whose second name was Smith?
Yes. No. By Melvin Conway in the paper, How Do Committees Invent? Which I thought was a lovely name for a paper.
You see, I would have thought it would be called How Do Committees Prevent?
Prevent.
Which does seem to be what they actually do. But go on.
So any organisation that designs a system, defined broadly, will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organisation's communication structure.
So for committees, we should read teams.
Yes, I think so, in the modern parlance.
In the modern parlance.
Mm-hmm. But not that Teams is a modern parlance as such, but such in the way that we organise ourselves, yeah.
Yes.
So it kind of posits another explanation. And the quote is, "It is a consequence of the fact that two software modules, A and B, cannot interface correctly with each other unless the designer and implementer of A communicates with the designer and implementer of B."
Yes, because A and B have to join together, so they have to agree an interface between them.
Yeah. So, and then if your organisation has the communication mechanisms in place for A and B to talk to each other and collaborate well, then they can do that. But if there's some kind of organisational barrier, departmental, whatever it is, that stops them from collaborating and communicating, then it might be a more difficult task.
But in terms of how it affects the structure of the thing being designed, the friction of communication is what defines a team, I suppose. So you have very good communication with people in your team.
Yeah.
And less good communication with people outside it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess probably like examples are quite useful here, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, when I worked for a large credit reference organisation in Leeds, there's only one, so
no one will ever be able to figure out who you're talking about.
You know who you are. There was a set of product development teams, and then one very large database administrator type team.
I thought you were talking about an individual, just very large and muscled, and would
nothing got past this
punch
person.
people's lights out if they tried to change the database.
So the system was structured in a way that all of the product development team's services all contacted one very large and one very centralized database.
Right.
With multiple teams' data stored within it. Because you still had... So in the development function, we'd broken off into lots of smaller development teams, but the responsibility for the database was still held centrally. So that remained as a central...
So this is like any centralised thing. It immediately becomes a bottleneck.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's like one example.
So just let me dig into this example. So Conway's law is about how the architecture of, in this case, software, matches the team structure that delivers it.
No, the organisation structure.
I think I might mean the same thing as that, or do I not?
I don't know. What do you mean by team structure?
Well, I mean the collection of teams that delivers it, rather than the internal structure of any one team.
Yes, that's how I understand it.
So there's the example is always compilers, which are things that translate source code that programmers create into machine language that computers can execute. Compilers, it was always said that if you had two teams building your compiler, you would have a two-stage compiler.
Yeah, and I think it works on so say if you've got multiple teams working in different locations around the world on the same system, then you will start to get like a pull apart because of the lack of collaboration or easy collaboration between them. So there's a few different ways that it kind of manifests itself.
So your database, I mean, that seems like an example of a bottleneck. So talk a bit more about the structure of the organisation and how that, I guess I'm trying to understand how it illustrates Conway's law, because I can't see it at the moment.
So the organisation structure was to have multiple product development teams and then one centralised database administrator team who did everything databasey.
Yeah.
So when we were building things and we wanted to change the database, because of the way the organisation was structured, we had to then request that from a central team to change a central thing. So we were doomed to repeat that pattern because of the way the organisation was shaped.
So the teams, I guess, were they responsible for delivering a different chunk of functionality or features?
Yeah, there were different systems, different services to do different jobs, which in theory you would want to have their own database instance for the data that they needed to...
Yes.
Yeah, but because of the way the organisation was structured, as in the large database admin team, they were like, no, that's too much trouble. We'll just have one instance and everyone's data can go into it. And then we can control that and we can administer it.
Prevent all work.
Yeah, pretty much. But there was no organisational will to challenge that particular status quo. So the structure of the organisation remained the same and therefore dictated what we could build and how fast we could go.
Okay. I guess I see that as an example of having bottlenecks and needing to design your organisation to not have bottlenecks. But it seems that the design of each. It's not clear to me how it's driving the design of each system.
I feel this is going terribly.
Maybe it's just that example.
Right.
Shall we not do that example and do a different example?
See, I think it's a good example.
See, okay, so maybe we are able to have an argument about this in the way that we're supposed to. I see Conway's law as driving the application architecture of a thing.
Yeah.
So if you're an e-commerce, you're doing a headless e-commerce site, you might have a checkout team, you might have a catalog team or a product catalog team, you might have a payments team, you might have a search, I don't know. And if you do that, if you had those teams, it's likely that your application, the boundaries, that you would have these boundaries in the application. Effectively, however many teams you had to do that, your application would basically have at a high level, a component per team.
Yeah.
And that would be cohesive and then loosely coupled to the things being delivered by the other teams in order for that to work. So you can look at the application architecture, and actually if you draw lines around the different components that a team owns, you'll see that the components owned by the team have more cohesion with each other and tighter coupling than as a whole they do with the other team's components. And that's what I see Conway's law as being about.
Right.
So the design of the organisation, in other words, what teams you have and what their responsibilities are, driving the design of an application that they're all delivering together.
Right.
And I guess what my confusion is, I don't understand. There's something very wrong with having one database, and all these different teams having to put their data in it, because it means that everyone becomes tightly coupled.
Yeah, but that's how the organisation is designed.
You mean because we've got a database team?
Yes. I agree with what you say,
okay,
but I still think it's a good example because essentially you've got an organisation which has been designed to have a centralised database administration team.
Ends up with a centralised database.
Yeah. So that ends up with the system with all the data on one centralised place.
Okay. Now I understand your example now. I latched on far too much to the disastrous dependency.
Yeah.
Of why would they? And of course I'm thinking, why would they do that? Because the answer is Conway's law.
Yeah, exactly. Because, in the past it's always been better to have a centralised database administration team. And then there was other reasons as well. So these database administrators, they were the ones who were on call to fix things.
Yeah.
So they wanted the world to be less complex. One place to go to look at things.
I want the world to be less complex.
Exactly. We all do, don't we?
Yes.
So that's what they desired. So there was no desire to change the organisation structure. Because if the organisation structure became a bit looser, and maybe you had smaller database administrator teams, or even a database administrator on each team, then you might end up naturally pulling apart that system. But the communication structure as it was dictated that the system would be centralised, the database part of it anyway. And I agree, it's a crazy example of something you should never do.
Yes.
But, that was the situation at the time.
So that's interesting. I mean, did you have a sense of the history of why? Was it just that there's always been a central database administration
team? Yeah, pretty much.
Team?
It's just organisational inertia.
So somebody said, right, we're going to build the first of these systems. And they said, well, you're going to have to store the data in the central database run by the central database administration team.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe I'm just being dumb before.
Well, I think if you come at it from an idea of well, why have they done it like that?
Yeah.
Then I see where you're coming from.
It was a very attractive piece of bait there too.
Yeah, but silly things happen within organisations just because of the way, again, they're structured, and it dictates what gets built.
It makes perfect sense if the database team was there first because of the historic databases that the company had.
Yeah, yeah.
Hopefully, the dumbest bits can be cut out during editing.
Well,
Ian's tone of incomprehension.
I mean, it's hard to give, I wanted to give an example of, me seeing it rather than a generic example of, you have ththese different
compilers.
teams. Yeah, exactly.
That's the traditional generic example.
I mean, it's a fair one, but...
yes.
So, where was I? So, we talked briefly before about the mythical Man Month. Fred Brooks, which is a collection of essays by Fred Brooks. My favourite one of which is the programmer would have a team of administrators and secretaries and things like that around them, which always made me laugh. So
back in the 19 whatevers.
Yeah. So it was Fred Brooks who first coined the term Conway's Law. And he said, because the design that occurs first is almost never the best possible. The prevailing system concept may need to change. Therefore, flexibility of organisation is important to effective design.
And almost anathema to people who have to manage budgets and other such.
Yeah, absolutely. You say
pan-organisation things.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key points, isn't it? That I've always found that convincing a bunch of developers and testers and other roles around software development to do things in an iterative, emergent fashion is not too hard. But convincing the rest of the business when they ask you for a budget forecast for the next 5 years is much more difficult. But that speaks to Conway's Law, because say if you're asked for how much money you're going to spend in the next 5 years, then you might over-egg it a little bit.
No. Nobody's ever done that, Ash. That's just a terrible... Everybody will try and come up with the leanest possible budget because they know exactly what they're going to have to do and they can exactly estimate how much it will cost.
And you might commit to bigger things as well than you might necessarily do so.
Yes.
So your systems might suffer with bigness as well, as in over-engineering and overscaling and over whatever it is.
It's just completely impossible, Ash. I don't understand. You're just trying to convince me of something that will never happen.
And then the other thing that I found quite interesting was the inverse Conway maneuver.
Ooh,
which sounds amazing, doesn't it?
Yes.
So you change the communication patterns of the designers to encourage the desired software architecture.
So basically, the architects should be in charge of the organisation.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes.
You should bring them all in from IBM and put them in charge of everything.
That will never happen.
So I guess, say if you've got whatever the current phrase is, let's call it a monolith, a monolithic software product, and you want to break that up.
Into microservices.
Into something more micro. Yes, indeed. So you might say, okay, well, let's take a bunch of teams all working on the same code base and split them up. And eventually they will start to pull apart and decompose themselves. And that's what the theory is. So there was one particular place where I worked where there was 10 teams working on the same code base. And I'm not sure we started to pull apart, to be honest. Well, we didn't. Everything was very tightly coupled, and most changes had to be very, very closely managed.
Was there a change management board?
No, but we tried to cope with it by doing smaller and smaller changes.
Well, that's no bad approach.
Yeah, but it was a coping thing rather than a fixing thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that the inverse Conway maneuver, from my personal experience anyway, is particularly effective.
But it's a great name, so we should all adopt it.
It is a great name. It is a great name. That's always one that I try and treat with a little bit of, what's the word?
A pinch of salt.
With a bit of caution.
Loads of salt.
I salt it.
Yeah.
I salt it thoroughly.
Yes. Make sure it can never grow again. One thing that we've talked about a few times, in fact, it's even been a thing, is team topologies.
Yeah.
Where you're kind of designing, you've got teams that are delivering parts of your system.
Yeah.
And then you may have a platform team that's basically helping the teams to go faster. So is that somehow doing a bit of a sneaky slide past Conway's law? Or is it simply that the non-platform teams, the feature teams or whatever, the architecture is matching what they're doing, although they're able to go faster?
Yeah, because the idea is that you would, through some form of mapping exercise, you would find out what your value streams are.
Yes.
So, which is like how you might break down the work that's already being done, but organise it better into things that deliver value. And
we are going to have Wardley maps as a thing at some point, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then you would then, like I say, have like a platform type team to help those teams to deliver the things that the feature teams to deliver the value that exists within their streams.
I mean, does team topologies take account of Conway's law?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an inspiration. It's in there. It's in the book. Because I think it does make you... I think it's one of those concepts that makes you aware of what's happening in your organisation. Gives you a bit of a higher level view. Because you're like, why can't those teams talk to each other? And why do they keep having problems with their contract between each other? What is going on there? And it might be because there's some kind of invisible or more visible organisational barrier, or they don't own something that they need to own, or whatever it is. So I think team topologies is inspired by that kind of thinking.
And I guess you have to be, therefore, flexible.
Yeah.
As your software architecture evolves, that you change your teams to match.
Yeah. Yeah. So rather than just wishing that the world would be the same, because I guess that's another team topologies thing, where it's like, as you evolve the product, your value streams will probably change. So you need to go through the exercise regularly to detect what those changes are, and to organise your teams accordingly. Because there are... Sorry. I had a point then, but it's gone.
You're now pointless.
I am now pointless. Yeah. So, I guess let's start from a new question. Sorry, I'm getting tired. There's been a load of new practices, technologies, microservices, cloud, which...
Since Conway.
Since Conway, since the 60s.
Post-Conway and pre-Conway, that's how we can define the borders.
So I was wondering, putting one of the questions in the notes, have the rise of these different sort of techniques for building software and the cloud, have they mitigated the effects of Conway's law a little? Because it's easier, I think, for teams to take control of their dependencies and have their own environments and build smaller things. So I don't know, part of me thinks that maybe this effect has been mitigated a little.
Well, perhaps these things are moulding themselves around that.
Yeah.
I mean, cloud is basically enables you to do things quickly that used to take a long time.
Yeah.
And then because people can do more things, you can perhaps have smaller teams that then deliver.
Yeah.
I mean, microservices is great from that point of view, once you've got to a certain size. The thing is that actually Conway's law probably lies behind this whole monoliths microservices thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because a startup is a small team. It has one team. It builds a monolith because there's just one of it.
Yeah.
And then when it's successful and is, raking in the tens of millions or whatever, and they've got 50 teams, the only way to really... for that to work at all is for them to own their own microservices and work on them. That's interesting. I had not thought of that at all before. Because, of course, you've read the DevOps handbook and you hear stories of Amazon and LinkedIn, all these big companies that went through a transformation from a monolith to microservices, basically, as a kind of existential crisis at some stage in their growth. And I guess what actually lies behind that is Conway's law, isn't it? The stage in their growth meant they'd hired all these people, and then they divided them into teams, because you can't have a team of 300 people because it's just nuts. So they divided them into teams, but the teams are all tightly coupled because they're working inside a monolith.
Yeah.
And so that's where the existential crisis comes from, isn't it?
Yeah. So you're then compelled, in order to grow further, to break it all down somehow, some way, and you choose a pattern that helps you to do that. And
then Martin Fowler's Strangler Vine.
Oh yeah, the strangler pattern.
He's apparently written a blog post more recently updating that.
Yes, I think that's not a nice phrase, is it? Well, it isn't a nice phrase.
No, I'm not sure. I haven't read the blog post. I've just seen that it exists.
Right, okay, yeah.
I wonder if it does do that, if it recasts the terminology. But that is interesting. I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah.
But actually, you can see why a small team makes a monolith, and then growth forces you to break it into microservices. And actually, it might explain that microservices is not a good way to go to begin with.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of trying to forestall Conway's law, even though you're not multiple teams.
Yeah.
And you may be trying to, it's like, I'm just trying to defy gravity by meditating really hard or something. That may be a bit of a frivolous way of putting it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I often think about the size of teams as well. So I guess I come at this from a tester's point of view. So if I see a team that says it's a Scrum team of 7 plus or minus 2 people, it's always plus 2 people generally. Let's get this straight.
Yeah.
And then you've got like eight developers to a tester or whatever, and I'm like, is this part of, maybe it's not directly, but Conway's law related, but it's like, if that's your vision of a team, if that's the composition, then you're dictating your system as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
Or at least its bigness.
Well, you've got an interesting thing there, haven't you? Because as you take on more people, if you add them to an existing team, that means that you can not have to change your Conway's law inspired monolith to a duolith or something. Megalith.
I think megalith is actually a phrase, isn't it?
It is, yes. I think it's like standing stones or something. I think Stonehenge has megaliths.
It's your neolith.
Yes. That's where somebody's added an extra stone to Stonehenge in modern times. That's a neolith. Oh my goodness. Let's make up a few more words and then we can... but neologisms.
Yeah.
Oh, we're so funny. But yeah, how do you add people? So you're a startup. How do you add people to your team that's working on your monolith? And it's much easier to add them possibly unwisely to an existing team.
Yeah.
Because if you make a new team, what's it going to do? What will it be responsible for?
Yeah.
What's it going to own? How are you going to make it loosely coupled compared with your current team?
Yeah.
But the amount of work you need to do, it keeps going up and up and up. So you need these people. So you can start to see that managers looking at this problem have not got any attractive options. There's some point where you need 2 teams, but actually your application matches the 1 team. Yeah. Or maybe you've got 3 teams and the amount of progress you need to make goes up and up. You recruit people. Do you make a 4th team? And if so, how do you find something for it to do that's not tightly coupled to what the other 3 teams are working on?
Yeah, because, it depends on the balance of work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Some of it might be new functionality. Some of it might be changes to existing functionality. So how do you then dole that out through teams?
Well, maybe you just say, well, we're going to make a platform team with all these new people.
Yeah.
And they can just make the first 3 teams go faster.
Yeah. I once worked on a team of 30 people.
That's not a team.
It's a gang.
That's a loose confederation of warring individuals.
And the strange thing to me was it obviously needed to split. And every day we said we need to split the teams somehow. But yet no one wanted to do it.
But is that because no one can think of that it's the architecture? The team of 30 is working on something that it's hard to envision how that can be split so the two teams can work on two parts of it.
Yeah. So, the team of 30 were working on one monolith, if you like, one large code base. And it was just very difficult to say, well, who does what and how do we not trample all over each other without directly speaking to each other in the same team.
But the good news about this is that while it feels imponderable in the situation, there are actually all these patterns that you could look at for how to do that. And the obvious one is take a little part of it out, make it a new thing. Yeah. Yeah. But these patterns, there's loads of them and they're all documented very well. I feel a lot smarter in this bit of the discussion. So thank you for that thing. Okay. And I hope we can edit out the bit at the beginning where I was stupid.
No, let's keep that in.
No, I think we'll be editing that out because we're at 89 minutes exactly, which will be an editing extravaganza. Yes. So that convenient whole section could be just chopped out and I can appear not to be dumb. Only appear, but I will probably remain at the same level of intelligence that I currently am at. But yeah, that was a very thought-provoking thing. And actually, when you start looking into it, how deep it runs through everything.
Yeah. And it's one of those interesting, noted many, many years ago, but still very, very relevant today.
Yes.
So it's always worth keeping these older parts of wisdom in mind when you're looking at your organisation.
Yes, in technology, everything changes at the same time as it all remains the same.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So that was my thing.
Thank you, Ash. That was an outstanding thing. Outstanding. Remarkable. Top of the range thing.
Monumental.
Monumental, yes. Megalithic.
So how do you get in touch, Ian? Have we done that?
Well, I'd like to say that you can tweet to us at What a Lot of Thing.
But you can't.
But I can't because while you could do that, we probably wouldn't notice. But you can get in touch with us via email.
Yeah.
And rather than having a nice simple version of the email address, we're still going by technologyeors@whatalotofthings.com.
Okay.
Which we will write in the show notes because we expect that people can't spell that. How else can people get in touch with us?
The LinkedIn group as well?
The LinkedIn group, yes. Yeah. If you are swimming round in the healthy, clear waters of LinkedIn, that's not at all a cesspool of commercial avarice and bots, then join our LinkedIn group because there are no bots there, just the cream of the LinkedIn crop.
Yeah, and I've been sneakily inviting people to follow the group.
You have?
In small batches.
And some of them have been doing it.
And some of them have indeed been doing it. So,
and we like doing things in small batches, don't we? Small batch size, very important to everything we stand for.
Everything. Apart from the length of the podcast.
Apart from the length of the podcast. As we hit the 92.5-minute mark.
There you go.
But that's fine because by the time we've edited it, it will doubtless be about 12 minutes and you'll be like, that was too small. Please, please can we have a bit more?
So I guess all that's left to say is thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oh, you mean?
I mean everyone who was involved in the podcast. You, me.
And you who's listening.
And you who's listening.
Particularly... Oh, perhaps I'm a bit hungry.
Ian needs a snack.
Ian needs a snack. Ian always needs a snack. Thank you for listening. We love this time that we spend with you every 2 weeks.
Press the button.
Press the button.
The other button. Press the button that stops the recording.